Wake the fuck up. It's time to talk business. Jared Taylor, Matt Best, and Evan Hafer proudly present Blackhearted. Sponsored by BlackRifle Coffee Company and Arson Wave.
Well, hello everybody. We have Daniel back as a guest host today.
Hello.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Daniel was on our last one with the paleo treats.
That's right. Yep.
Yep.
Oh.
And
delicious goodness.
Evan's here.
I'm here. So I'm back, and we've got a special guest. It's the first time we've got a foundation, or we're going to talk nonprofits.
We're going to talk nonprofits.
We're going to talk about foundations.
We're going to dive into this, and hopefully at the end of it, you get some good takeaways on how. I mean, I really want to know a good way to vet nonprofits, make sure that they're doing the nice things that they collect money to do.
Right.
So with us today, we have Mr. Sean Lake.
Ooh.
All right, how's it going, guys?
Is that spelled S-E-A-N or S-H-A-W-N?
I didn't want to walk in a room with another Irish guy and not spell it the right way, so that's
Okay.
S-E-A-N.
Got it.
Prior.
Okay, perfect.
I'm the Irish guy, by the way, with the big stupid red beard.
Interesting.
So-
No amount of fluorescent lighting is going to mask the fact that he cannot tan well.
That's right.
No amount.
No amount.
So yeah, Sean, tell us, the whole history of this whole thing, like how'd it happen?
Yeah, well, so I'm a member of the board of directors of the Glen Doherty Memorial Foundation. Glen Doherty was one of the 2 Navy SEALs killed in Benghazi, Libya in 2012, and I know you guys are familiar with the whole incidents in Benghazi, and I guess, what's the rules on foul language on this thing?
You can use all you
Oh,
want.
it's free. Yeah, did you in the intro?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually wasn't paying attention. My ADD kicked in. Well, you guys know what a shit show Benghazi was, and so Glenn was my closest friend growing up. We both were born and raised in Massachusetts. I went to high school in Winchester together. We moved out to Utah together as teenagers. We're ski bums, and then he joined the Navy and moved down to San Diego. And the last couple of years he was my roommate before the incidents in Benghazi. So after he died, I was the executor of his estate, and I was working really closely with his family on just kind of, boy, what do you do with something that is such a massive public political shit show? And so Kate, Glenn's little sister, kind of had this idea really just days after the incident and said, we got to do something in Glenn's name. Like, we can't just let him, disappear into the history books. And she said, what do you think about a foundation? And I was like, well, shit, I don't. And then we kind of kept the conversation going. And once we got through the funeral services and we had a month or so to kind of really sit down and go, like, what does this mean? Like, what would a foundation look like? We said, okay, what does Glenn stand for? Self-improvement, getting better. He was always about, kind of work hard, play hard as a mantra. He carried around that Teddy Roosevelt poem in his wallet, The Man in the Ring. And, the only man who knows the meaning of life is the one who comes out bloodied and unbowed, but not the guy sitting on the sidelines, that sort of thing. And I'm paraphrasing. And so Glenn really, when he got out of the Navy, he went and got his bachelor's degree, and he was going to maybe go to flight school, and he was maybe going to go back to PA school and be a firefighter. And he was always learning and educating himself and reading books and figuring out what was next. But he never actually did, and that's where the contracting work kind of kept pulling him back into the military and working direct for GRS. And the idea of self-improvement was like, well, fuck, Glenn got sucked back into this life, and he stayed in that life, and he stayed too long. How do you help others avoid that pitfall? How do you avoid them from falling into that? And so we thought, well, self-improvement and self-betterment, what better way than through scholarship? So the Glen Doherty Foundation essentially is 90% scholarships, 10% recreation. The recreation bubble we had to have in there because Glenn had that whole play hard side to him. And we decided that one made sense if it was something that was where a family was affected by charity, a military family. You'd have that kind of caveat to help them out, grief counseling, vacation, whatever you want to call it. But it's really meat and potatoes is people that want to go back to school. You're getting out of the military. You've got this highly specialized skill set. What do you do with that? And the thing to do with it is educate yourself, make yourself better. Trade school, MBA, medical school, physician's assistant, whatever the hell you're into, don't let the financial blockade stop you from doing it. Like if the GI Bill doesn't cover everything, look for those sources that can help you with it. So that's where we came in. We filled a gap there, and we're pretty happy. I mean, we're a mom and pop operation. There's 4 of us. It's everyone's favorite part-time job, as we refer to it. And we raise money from having runners go run the Boston Marathon, which just wrapped up today. So it's a nice charitable initiative. Runners that get charity bibs pledge to raise $10,000, and we get 5 runners, 6 this year actually, and then a couple runners will go and do the New York Marathon as kind of a secondary initiative, and then there's a road race named after Glenn in our hometown of Winchester. So it's basically a running charity, in terms of fundraising, which is an activity Glenn hated
Are all of
doing.
you guys volunteers?
Yeah.
That work on the board? You see,
Yeah.
I like those.
Yeah.
I don't understand people that do not have careers or things to support themselves and immediately go into nonprofits. I don't get that.
Right. One of the things I was going to ask you is how you keep your overhead low, but I guess you already answered that question, right?
Yeah, like our buddy Charlie Shannon, his little brother Mikey Shannon's on the board, and his wife answers all of our emails and kind of is our webmaster. She knows how to put together a PDF because she works in real estate. So whenever we do a running race, she kind of pieces that together. I tackle anything that happens on the West Coast because I'm the only one who's not in Massachusetts. So if there's a fundraising initiative, like Glenn was really active in the CrossFit space. So, there's some different gyms that like to do the Glenn workout or WOD that's named after him. And then they want to make t-shirts and fundraise. So I'll lend a hand at stuff like that. Katie's been kind of the face of things from a media standpoint because obviously Benghazi hasn't really died down in the news. So anytime there's something like that, she'll pop on and, try and slide something in there left or right to let
What
people
are
know.
what are some of your guys' flagship kind of fundraiser events? Like, I mean, there's got to be 1 or 2 like a year that you guys really focus on.
Yeah,
that pulls in a majority of your donations.
Today's the day, Boston Marathon.
Oh, wow.
So literally the Boston Marathon getting charity bibs from the John Hancock Foundation that get handed over to the Glen Doherty Foundation, which can then shoulder tap different people to run the marathon. And those individuals take on the pledge. They put their credit card down and say, I will raise $10,000 for this charity. And if I don't, I'm going to pay for it out of my own pocket.
Right. So
my wife and I ran it in 2014. Don't ever fucking run a marathon if you can help it, or run one and just be done with it. But it was a good bucket list item. My wife will hate me for saying that because she's run like a dozen of them. But yeah, I put my credit card down and I said, okay, I'm going to run for Glenn. And it's kind of a goofy thing because Glenn and I used to run together, and it felt a little bit weird until I showed up on the start line. And all of a sudden, like, I'm wearing a t-shirt that said Glenn would go, that someone from the foundation made, and a horrible font and all that stuff. But
Right.
I wasn't there for that. And like, all of a sudden I got these people patting me on the back, like, yeah, Glenn would go. Total strangers. And I'm like, whoa. I kind of got my running legs. I got into it. And then I'd already done the fundraising part of it. Like, that part was done. But the actual event experience was mind-blowing because you got all these strangers, and like, they knew, they were like, they weren't just reading the t-shirt saying cheering you on. Some of them were, but the ones that really got into it were like, Glenn, Benghazi, yeah, like stuff that like gives you goosebumps, and you're grinding out a marathon, and which wasn't really easy for me. And then, but man, if you couldn't get a little pep in your step from that, and that's the kind of thing where people get energized to keep doing it. These events that keep people coming back to do more and like give to a cause. And like, if you're gonna run for a marathon, you can run for yourself, but man, if you can run for something bigger than yourself, it feels pretty good.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, like, interacting with the foundation. This is the first time we met was today, but I'd known Glenn for several years. I worked with him a couple different times, and Glenn was one of those guys. He was always positive energy. He was never negative energy. I talk about that a lot in the ecosystem, where if you just literally are always trying to create positive energy, and it's not like going around being a cheerleader, though Glenn was oftentimes a cheerleader, quite literally, like, come on guys, let's go, like super stoked about, like, hey, we got a ton of pallets we got to move, are you guys stoked for this or what? And you're like, yep. No, but yeah, sure, dude. So it's interesting because I could see how his life and the energy that he created while he was here, it just continues on because he created so much positive energy. That inertia had to continue forward. Like, there's just no way. And when you split an atom, it can create, put the lights on, or it can blow something up, right? And Glen was one of those guys that could put the lights on.
Yeah.
And he could blow some stuff up.
Oh yeah, I had that skill set too. I mean, that's actually really well stated. Like, we couldn't not honor Glen's life and just the energy that he brought to the room. I mean, his nickname for all of us, or we would call him the Facebook before Facebook, because he would literally like keep in touch with everyone. It was like a full-time job to like keep these different pockets of people socially connected. And I mean, there was 400 plus people that showed up in Del Mar for the memorial service that were just buddies from Utah, river guides, high school friends. I mean, pockets of people I'd never met, and I thought I'd met just about everyone. And man, it was a wild, eclectic collection of people from all walks of life that all had this Glen thing in common. And they all talked about just wanting to be a better person as a result of being in this company, because he was such a positive person. And like, he just didn't let you dick drag it. He brought the best out of you, whether you wanted it or not.
Yeah, he'd force you to be good. It's funny because I remember one of our first conversations, we were talking about rivers. We were talking about guiding rivers, and that's my other company, which is Idaho River Adventures, which is not a stump on that. It's just guiding and rowing boats in the middle of the Frank Church Wilderness area.
And honeypots.
And honeypots. He was just one of those guys, man. You could find a connection with Glen around 360 degrees. There was something you had in common. Oh, hey, I'm kind of a gun guy too, or I'm kind of a river guy, or hey, I'm really into this music, or whatever it is. But it was never like, yeah, this fucking sucks.
I'm not into that.
And I think it's incredible. I mean, I've wanted to have that conversation with you guys for quite a while, just in the sense of, what do you guys do? How do you do it, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to the foundation, like, it had to mean something to Glen's life. It's kind of like breast cancer research is breast cancer research, and there's some great people that do it. I think the ones that do it best do it when there's a personal attachment to whatever that cause is. So like in CrossFit, you've got barbells for boobs, where you've got CrossFitters that are super active, socially active people that have a friend who's been affected by breast cancer, and they have a rallying cry and a cause. Awesome. They're authentic. They mean it. Like, they're energized around that cause. With Glen, we had this very real problem to a very special group of people. And when you've got spec ops soldiers that are getting out of the military, there is a struggle to adjust to civilian life. Like Mikey Ritland, who is one of Glen's team guys, Mikey found a niche for himself. Mikey was able to write books about dogs and got into dog training. Like, he had this thing that he could go to. But there's a ton of guys that didn't have that. So all of a sudden they're like, what do I do now? I know how to kill people, and I can bandage some people up over here, or I can, whatever the specifics of that job were, they had that, but it didn't translate out into civilian life. And when I went through all the different career paths over the years with Glen, it was like, I'm going to write this book. And he wrote that 21st Century Sniper book, and it was a good project, and it scratched a little itch, but it wasn't the transition piece. So he would go back to school, get his bachelor's degree. Maybe I'll be a pilot. Pilot ultimately didn't really make sense for him or work out. What ultimately he thought made sense was, I'm going to go back to PA school. So it was about education, and it was about driving himself to find that answer. He ultimately never got there, unfortunately. And I would hate to, I watch other people still stuck in that situation. So how do you address that? Well, start a foundation, create a vehicle where people can apply for scholarships, help offset the financial burden of going to school, because that was something Glen truly believed in, and I watched him go through it. Well, then we're being true to a community that has a real problem, and we're offering a little bit of help towards that end goal of a successful transition out of the military, so people don't have to go contract, they don't have to continue to put themselves at risk, they don't have to go into those high-risk situations into their late 40s when they're just, man, it's time for something else.
Yeah, and it's funny because you just described half of my friends. They're like stuck in purgatory where they've ETS'd out of the military, they're contracting, they continue to contract, and they're always like, we used to have this running joke. It was like, guy would go, yeah, I'm going to go back and, go to get my master's degree, or I'm going to start this other business, or I'm going to do this. Like, I can't tell you how many guys, like, they would tell us their end game, like, I'm just doing a couple
just
pumps.
doing this for a couple years.
And then it was like, and they'd walk out of the room and like, that guy will be back in 2 months. And and everybody, literally most of us were like that. So it was like constantly stuck in that rotation. And I know guys were constantly fighting to try to get out of that. And they were, stashing money. I was fortunate enough, like I stashed enough money that, the 2 years that I spent after I got out of that, I guess, that rotational cycle, it wasn't a huge blow. I think we talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
I made $24,000 the year after I left, but then the next year I made a little bit more. Next year, this third years, I guess. And, I was always looking like, hey, you know what? When I want to transition, I want it to be on my terms. I don't want to be, trying to transition out of the fact that it's a necessity. And, we see guys and we create opportunities here, like literally every week, it seems like, for dudes that are like, hey, I need to get out, or I'm ETSing, or I'm contracting, whatever it might be. It's like, hey, come to work for us, man. Like, even if you're not a permanent home, or you don't find a permanent home here, you'll at least learn some pretty cool skills that you'll be able to take somewhere else. So, I don't want to like transition so hardly, but I really think it's important for people to know, like, how do you sniff out a good foundation? So if I had an extra $1,000 burning a hole in my pocket, or I believe in something, like, how do I find
big deal to the
foundations?
community, because it's one of the most popular questions we're asked.
Oh yeah,
And
all the time.
There's also been some fuckery.
Oh my God, there has been a lot of fuckery all over the place.
You ever want to hear a good fuckery story? Just ask Dan Cirillo, Taco, about what he thinks about the Wounded Warrior Project, and you'll get an earful.
Wow.
I'm sure there's quite a few people out there that like to talk about that one.
Yeah, well, we're going to dodge that one for this conversation, but where's the bullshit test? Where's the sniff test?
Right.
There are some online mechanisms that you have to disclose all your financials, and there's I should know this off the top of my head, but because it's a part-time gig and I don't really pay that close attention to it, it's called Charity Finder or Charity. Oh, GuideStar, that's it.
Yeah.
GuideStar is the name of it. So
.org.
Yes, .org. Yep. Unless they have some inside track, I believe it's a government-run group that opens up the books on all charities, so you can look at their financials and see how much goes to charity, how much goes to programming. Programming can be code for salaries, and how much is actually going out into the cause that you want to support. Now, this is where things get tricky, right? Because you want to run your charity efficiently, and just like you want to run your business efficiently, you want to raise the most money that you can, just like you want to make the most money that you can if you're a business. You want to donate the most money that you can, and you want to obviously profit as much as you can. Well, if everyone does something part-time, and it's just kind of like an afterthought of a feel-good thing, you put your energy towards it, but it's your part-time energy, you're never going to really get the most out of that.
Right.
And that's whether it's your business or your charity.
Yeah.
So Glen Doherty Foundation, we're in the middle of this right now. It's everyone's part-time job. Like, no one does this for a living. We do it on nights and weekends. It feels good. It's the right thing to do. But I'd be lying if I said, oh, I spend 40, 50 hours a week really driving this home and turning this into this massive fundraising machine to help as many people in the community as I could. It's very niche because we don't take any overhead. We're at that jump off point where we don't want to pay ourselves some big salary to go out and to take this on as a full-time job. No one has looked at that. So we're at this little bit of a crossroads. That being said, any charity that you want to spend money to, you want to make sure the money's going to a good place. Well, if that good place is supporting military transition, okay, look at the different organizations that provide that, because GDMF, Glen Doherty Foundation's just one of several that do that. Use a group like GuideStar and dive into their financials. It's pretty transparent to know, like, oh, how much of money is really going to the cause. And there's usually a ratio that people use. Like, if you're up past 70% to 30%, like if 30% is overhead and 70% goes to the cause, you're doing okay. If you can get up into the 80s, you're like phenomenal. That means like everyone's working for free, basically. And there's a few groups that like to say that they are 100% of your donations goes directly to charity. And there's a group out of New York called, I believe they're called Charity Water. And Charity Water takes all of their rent, salaries, overhead, all from corporate donors. So they put that over here so that any one of us in a room, if we were to donate to Charity Water, you get that 100% pass through to the end cause, which is, providing water or clean water in Africa or whatever cause du jour they're on. So for them, they're still getting paid. They're still keeping the lights on. They still got their laptops and their wireless internet and all the things they need to do to pump out their communications, but it's being paid for from a different source. So interesting. I would call that a little bit murky, but at the same time, it's genius because they're doing a great job of making sure that your average donation, which is the majority of their donations, has a direct pass-through.
Yeah, I
so
think
those
that
are things
works.
you
I
want
mean,
to look at.
getting a corporation to come on and say, yeah, I'll cover the expenses, because that's kind of how Activision does it with the Call of Duty endowment. Activision pays for the salary of the people that work for Code.
Yeah.
So they cover the cost, but you work for Code. You work for the foundation that's putting veterans in jobs. So 100% of the money that's donated to Code goes back to that actual cost.
And that happens a lot in academia as well. One of my friends is an economist, and her entire salary comes from foundations. So let me ask you this. You guys seem to be thinking about that maybe. How do you keep external influences out of your organization? Because you guys have a very clear mission statement.
Yeah, that's actually another great question. So when we first started, we just thought we were going to hand out scholarships so that if Evan called me up and said, hey, I was buddies with Glenn and I want to go get my MBA, I would say, all right, well, you knew Glenn, you served in the military, you understand what we're all about, you're a great candidate, approved. There's actually legislation in place that prevents us from being able to do that. Apparently back in Vietnam, there were a bunch of rich guys that didn't want their friends' kids and their kids to have to get drafted and go off to war. So a lot of charities were formed in the 60s, and they were offering scholarships left and right. And if you had a scholarship to go to school, that was your out. You didn't have to join the military. Right. So it was your classic draft dodge. So then legislation was quickly put into place to circumvent that. So you have to have a third-party verification in order to offer a scholarship. So I would say take in Evan's application, and I would look at it and say, this is phenomenal. I can't endorse this enough. I'm not the decision maker, though. So I have to pass that off to this third party and have them vet it out. So we have a group that does that for us. We also took the Glen Doherty Foundation kind of back on how to vet out a charity. We weren't sure how long we were going to be involved in the charitable space because it was really sparked from emotion. So we created an endowment for the Glen Doherty Foundation so that we would protect that initial investment. That way you're kind of forcing fiscal responsibility and accountability onto yourself. So you kind of take that first nut. It was a $250,000 investment, and then you can't give any of that money away. You have to give the interest of that money away. And then anything you raise above that, you can then give away. So we effectively are living off of the interest of the original donor's money. So it makes sure that we never accidentally blow the bank. So if we decide we want to buy an 18-wheeler and drive around country and promote Glen Doherty Foundation, we can't do things like that. So it's a nice way to kind of keep yourself in check and keep to the mission.
No, it's pretty interesting. So explain to me like exactly what the rules between an endowment specifically. Is it a federal legislation that have passed specifically defining endowments versus a nonprofit? Can you explain the difference between those two?
Not well.
Okay.
So I know that we volunteered to go the endowment route. Like we didn't have to do that. That was our choice internally to say, hey, we just raised $250,000. We don't actually know what we're doing here. So why don't we protect ourselves from ourselves and create an endowment? And that was not, federally issued. It was all done, again, kind of privately, third party, just to protect the Glen Doherty Foundation for that long term. Like we could choose to dissolve the endowment and then take all that money that's been sitting there and then do one big disbursement, and call it a day and everyone walks away from it. Or take the money and give it to another charity, which is quite common that you kind of are horse swapping. it's like right now I'm in the middle of a fundraiser with a former Navy SEAL named Lance Cummings, and he's doing this march across Greece called the Sparta 300. And he's raising money, but he wanted to raise money for a couple of charities. So he's raising money for the Navy SEAL Foundation. And then because Lance and I had spent some time at SEALFIT together at local operation in our home community, and Glen was one of the coaches at SEALFIT, he wanted to also include Glen's foundation. So you've got one initiative to raise money that actually goes split into 2 different charities. But yeah, sorry, back on the endowment thing, we just voluntarily did that because we wanted to just make sure we were always, being fiscally responsible as we're going into this uncharted territory of raising money.
So what's been your biggest challenge over the last few years? Has it been basically, learning the nonprofit space and then trying to raise money or issue scholarships, or is it kind of all together? Yeah,
a little bit all together. The first 2 years, we raised this money that I referred to in the endowment, and then a little bit more money beyond it, and we had no one to give it to. So we were sort of like running around calling the Navy SEAL Foundation, the Navy SEAL Family Foundation, and we're like, hey, who do you know? And like I'd get guys like Shane Hyatt and Mikey Ritland on the phone, and I'd be like, do you guys know anyone that wants to go to school? Like, is there anyone out there in the community that's maybe they're out of the Navy? And it was tough. Like we didn't give any money away. And then finally we got like our first recipient. I remember we all had this call and we were celebrating like actually being able to give someone money to go to school. We're like, yes. What are they? They're freshmen. Yes, that's 4 years that we can give them money. That's perfect. And then the next year there were 4 applicants, and then 6, and then 10, and then now here we are today, and this is the first year that we actually have more applicants than money to give them. So that was our initial problem. That's not a problem anymore. Now the problem is flipped to how do we raise enough money to take care of this community and make sure that we can keep feeding them? Because we're at that point we've had to say no for the first time. And that doesn't feel very good. If you're in the charitable space and you're in the space where you want to be able to say yes and help people get on with their lives and take those next steps forward, and you have to go like, yeah, listen, you're a great candidate, you meet all the criteria, but we're out of money. Try again next year, you're on our waiting list.
Right.
That's so fundraising is, you got the Boston Marathon, that's great. You got the New York Marathon, that's great. You got a little road race in Winchester, they're all great things, but we know that we're kind of at this tipping point where we're either going to stay real niche and small, or we need to take a step out past ourselves, out of our comfort zone, and invest in the ability to raise more money and be able to help more people. And that's kind of that crossroads now. So that is definitely a hurdle that we're facing.
And then how many recipients have been awarded scholarships through you guys so far?
I think we're at, I want to say 18 right now.
Okay. And are those all former soft guys, or is it cross-section?
Initially it was a cross-section. Now they're all former soft guys. Now that word's out,
right,
the applicants are coming straight from guys that are active duty or just getting out or
right,
planning their exit, and they're kind of like in that transition phase. But the first couple scholarships were actually for the children of active duty SEALs. So it wasn't what we expected, but we always had kept that open, that if that financial burden is going to be on the SEAL, it's also going to be on his wife and his family. So the first 2 scholarships were for children of active duty SEAls.
That's awesome.
So, and that's still open because these guys are trying to, put food on the table.
Yeah, where can people find more information about you guys, or if they want to donate? Where do they go? The
best spot to go is the Glen Doherty Foundation website. So it's glendohertyfoundation.org. We were lucky. We got our 501(c) official nonprofit status like within 2 months, because there was a Massachusetts senator that was sympathetic to the cause, and he helped get us through right away. But yeah, we have a little PayPal button on there. PayPal actually, believe it or not, ended up being one of the more affordable engines to use to help take online contributions. We get a lot of old school contributions. You can mail a check. The address is right on there. It's Kate's address in Marblehead, Massachusetts.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, again, we thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
All right, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Sean.
Cheers.
Black Rifle Coffee Company, along with Arson Wave, would like to thank you for tuning in to Blackhearted. Have a great fucking day.